Welcome to your comprehensive wrap-up of what the hell is going on in news this week, the cliff notes, the cheat sheet, the conversation you need to stay across absolutely everything. I'm Georgie Tunny.
And I'm James Law.
And this is Flash Drive. J-Law, what a week.
Jeez, it's been tough.
Oh my gosh, we've made it to March.
Yeah.
But I think we've crawled there.
It's raining news this week.
Oh my gosh, I know. We're going to be going through everything that has been happening with the flooding disaster along the east coast of Australia. We're going to check in on each other and see how we're actually coping with this disastrous news cycle of this week, because things are pretty heavy. But we're going to begin, of course, with what is going on over the other side of the world in Eastern Europe, because there really does seem to be an update every single hour on what is happening with the war on Ukraine. Last Thursday, Russia launched a special military operation and invaded their neighbour. The world reacted. This was US President Joe Biden.
Brutal assault on the people of Ukraine. Without provocation, without justification, without necessity. This is a premeditated attack. Vladimir Putin has been planning this for months, as we've been saying all along.
So since then, Russia's doubled down on its invasion. It's upped its military forces. Hundreds of people have been killed. The shelling's been continuing. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are seeking asylum in Poland and other EU countries now as air raid sirens scream out across the country. Chilling. That sound is just makes you stop in your tracks. So anti-war protests and vigils have been held across the world in solidarity with Ukraine. The Prime Minister of Australia attended one such event over the weekend.
Pray for a peace that is not just the absence of war, but a peace that enables people of Ukraine to live according to their own rules, according to their own sovereignty, and to have their own freedom.
J-Law, can you see peace happening? Is peace still possible?
Look, it's hard to see at the moment. I mean, I've been encouraged by the Ukrainian people fighting back in the way that they have. I think that they've surprised the whole world in a great way. Their willingness to fight for their country, the spirit that they've shown has been really encouraging. You know, I think it's clear that Russia wanted to do a really swift invasion. In fact, their plans were to take Kyiv within 48 hours. That has not been possible so far. However, at the time of recording this chat, you know, the Russian forces have regrouped. They're coming back in their thousands with much larger manpower and firepower. At the time of our chat right now, there's a 60-kilometre convoy of Russian military tanks and other vehicles steaming towards Kyiv. That's a worry to me. I think that they will just continue to, you know, reamass their forces until they follow through on what they want and take the capital. So it is hard to see how this will end peacefully at the moment.
Well, and we are hearing that from military experts around the world, right? They are agreeing with you and thinking that Russia has maybe made some miscalculations with their military strategy because they thought that this invasion of Ukraine was going to go a lot more smoothly. They maybe weren't expecting the resistance of the Ukrainian people. Here's one example of that. This is James Spider-Marks talking on CNN, a retired US Army Major General.
What the Russians have clearly demonstrated is that they tried to achieve success in far too many places. So if you try to win everywhere, you're not going to win anywhere. Clearly, the numbers belong to the Russians. The persistence and the will, which has just been phenomenal, belongs to the Ukrainians.
Belongs to the Ukrainians. However, there is this sense now that, as you say, J-Law, it is inevitable that the capital is going to be taken over by Russia. In terms of what we are seeing with the spirit of Ukraine, there's so many heartbreaking images, you know, over the past few days. The ones that are really staying with me, the speeches from the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky saying or encouraging the people of Ukraine to arm themselves, employing that martial law, teaching them how to make Molotov cocktails, not letting men aged between 18 and 60, I think it is,
That's right.
leave the country. It's just unfathomable that we are in this position, but they are holding firm. It's terrifying that they have to.
Indeed. And, I think he is very interesting and an interesting figure, Vladimir Zelensky. He's become the figurehead and the hero of this. He has committed to staying in the country, knowing his life is very much at stake, knowing, he said the other day that, I'm Russia's public enemy number one. When they're coming to Kiev, they're coming for him, because they want to decapitate the government. And where do you start? Then with him. So you have to admire his bravery and doing whatever he can to push back against this unrelenting force. It's been impressive to watch, and you can see how his spirit has filtered down to the rest of the people, and how they're trying to do what they can to fight back. And there's been countless examples of the Ukrainian army, which is, much, much smaller. I've got the numbers here, like the number of troops that, army troops that Ukraine has is 196K versus Russia's 900K.
Gosh.
So they're really, on the back foot there. But, they've managed to shoot down planes. They've managed to, as of the time we're speaking, they've managed to hold the forces out of their major cities. So it's been impressive to watch. And I've been really interested about some of this commentary, like the one we just played about military experts questioning Russia's strategy. That they probably were trying to come into the country on too many fronts. Also, there's been cases, reports out of Ukraine of, some of the tanks and armoured vehicles just running out of petrol and them having to abandon them. Like there was a story I read in the paper about them just going up to a shop and asking for some fuel.
Oh, gosh.
They were turned away.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I thought I was like, what kind of reception can you expect a Russian troop invading Ukraine being like, we need a jump lead?
Right.
You got one? You got one?
I don't know if the NRMA, goes to Ukraine.
No. And it's such a serious situation. It's one though that isn't new for Russia, right? We are used to seeing this aggression, whether it be the invasion of Georgia in 2008, the annexation of Crimea in 2014. But what is it about this particular conflict, this invasion of Ukraine this time around, that is different from the others? Does it even feel different for you?
Well, it feels like a continuation of what they were trying to do in Crimea. In fact, like a following through on what they were doing all those years ago. Putin clearly feels that this country belongs to him and belongs to the Russian people. And I think it'll be interesting to see whether they follow through on some of those techniques they've used in the past in places like Syria and Chechnya, where what they do is, if they meet any resistance, is they just kind of like fire on those cities, push the people away until they can move in, and it should be pretty brutal if they continue with those techniques. I mean, I think what's scary also is Putin's threats around using his nuclear power.
Yeah, that happened this week, putting his nuclear forces on high alert.
And, you could see that as a move of his desperation, right? He's trying to use, the scariest thing in his arsenal, quite literally.
Yeah.
So, you could interpret that threat as being something that doesn't make his invasion look so solid.
Yeah.
But who knows with Putin?
Well, this is the thing, right? Because there's been so much commentary. We've delved into it a little bit as well on previous episodes of this podcast. We've delved into it in previous episodes of this podcast too, about what his motivations are, what is the end game, and how he sees Ukraine as this quintessential part of Russia that he's not willing to give up. I think some of the most interesting commentary has been about, well, what happens now for the West if Russia does, as it's seeming, in all likelihood will, take over Ukraine and essentially then have that country become under Russia's control, or have a government that is pro-Russia. And then what that means for the West and how they've handled this in terms of sanctions and, diplomacy has failed. but also in terms of what it could mean for other countries. This is what US President Joe Biden thinks. He thinks that Russia definitely has its sights set on targets other than Ukraine.
He has much larger ambitions in Ukraine. He wants to, in fact, reestablish the former Soviet Union. That's what this is about. And I think that his ambitions are completely contrary to the place where the rest of the world has arrived.
Completely contrary. However, at the moment, they seem to be pretty successful.
Well, it's such a, it's an interesting time. It feels like something that that takes us back to World War II, where
Yes.
if you don't recognise certain borders, and that if you feel like you have a right to, that you can just go and invade and claim it in your country's name. It feels like a very old-fashioned concept, but it's one that he's really testing. And I mean, what do you think? Where do you think that this could go, and what is the broader ambition here?
Well, I think that one of the biggest motivations for Putin is just shutting down Western democracy in Ukraine. You know, they've said previously that they want to become a part of NATO, and I know that that was an excuse, really, that Putin has made for justifying his aggression towards them and then ultimately invading him. However, if you look to countries like Poland, which is a member of NATO and now has, you know, pretty much a flourishing Western democratic view of, you know, society, then that's not too different or too much of a hop, skip of a jump of what Ukraine could become if it had continued to be allowed to prosper as it was, as a sovereign nation. So I think that is definitely on Putin's mind, just as in conjunction with him being a fan of, you know, a historian, a revisionist, wanting to just have Ukraine belong to Russia. But in terms of how the world is going to see Russia if it does complete this takeover, I don't know I'm not too sure what it means for him now, because there's so many sanctions. I'm not sure necessarily if he was thinking that the West would stay united or stay as harsh in their sanctions and keep that, really toe that line, that united line. I mean, we've seen this week that Switzerland has now entered the fray. You know, a traditionally very neutral country says that it is going to be imposing some of the same sanctions that other European countries have on Russia. We are now seeing the effect when it comes to sporting events. You know, they've been thrown out of the world of football. They're not allowed to compete at the 2022 World Cup, even if they did qualify. Then the women's team aren't going to be allowed to play in the European Championship. The Champions League final's gone. The IOC may let the Russian Winter Paralympians compete at that event, which starts at the end of this week. But, you know, they won't be allowed to have a national anthem. There won't be any flags that are going to be able to be presented. And they have been very, very strong in their denouncement of Russia's actions, because they say that it really does just go against everything that the Olympics or Paralympics stands for. So in terms of friends that Russia will have left after this,
Not many. Yeah, and they are becoming very isolated very quickly. And we saw in recent days the effect it is having on its economy pretty quickly. You know, they were forced to put up interest rates. The ruble crashed to its lowest value ever. And, you know, there's runs on Russian people trying to get their money out and convert it into US dollars, knowing that that currency will be worthless. So it's interesting to see how swiftly that has happened. And also, there's reports that some of the Russian billionaires, the oligarchs, are starting to question Putin, which is quite remarkable.
I think that's pretty big. I mean, I'm not saying I have a glimpse into Vladimir Putin's inner workings of his mind. However, going off his history, his autocracy that he promotes, himself being that authoritarian leader, I think he enjoys keeping that inner circle, that very powerful inner circle, the very powerful financially inner circle, and keeping them on side and having that be very, very important to him. So if the oligarchs are coming out and saying, hang on a second, our private jets are getting stopped, our boats, we don't know where we can moor them, we don't have access to any financial transfers. I think the owner of the Chelsea Football Club is trying to temporarily change the ownership into someone else's name. Like, it could have really big ramifications, potentially.
Yeah, and so I guess it's a question of whether this will, only harden Putin's resolve or whether it might isolate him even more and, potentially there'll be question marks about what goes on going forward. But yeah, it is sort of like watch it every minute, every hour to see where it turns.
Well, we're not the only ones watching, if we are to believe the rhetoric out there as well, which has been predominantly presented in the West, it's fair to say, but I think that it is very justified. China will be watching the situation very closely. That is what the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, believes anyway.
China, of course, is watching this very carefully, and that's why I've been at pains to say that China needs to take as strong a position as other countries in the world in denouncing what Russia is doing.
So there's been a little bit of a change in language, I guess we can say, geopolitical language, since Scott Morrison made those comments to Channel 7 last week, in terms of it was very much an invitation for China to really join the West in denouncing Russia. And now it's kind of been like maybe switched a little bit in terms of them saying the West really criticising China for not doing enough now. But it's a subtle shift, but I think that has been key because, of course, everyone believes that China is watching what's going on with Russia and Ukraine because they have similar intentions to do exactly the same thing to Taiwan.
Yeah, and they're very similar situations, right? Because much like Russia thinking that Ukraine belongs to it, China believes that Taiwan belongs to China. Not even that China and Taiwan are the same thing.
Yes.
It's all China.
Yes.
So they will be watching it very closely, I'm sure. I'm sure they'll be taking notes about, there's probably some pretty solid do's and don'ts if they want to take a similar path. So it's interesting to hear, Scott Morrison be that out front on this and, telling them to make a strong statement now. I mean, China has come out and said that it would like to see, this resolved, but it hasn't exactly pointed the finger at Russia.
Yes.
Like, oh, whoops, there's just some conflict happening.
Yeah. I mean, there's just no denying that everything seems to be really fraught right now. And I think for everyone who is watching the crisis, because it's not just us. This is where it's interesting. It's where news hounds like ourselves, J-Law, and regular everyday Joe public are probably watching, in a way, sometimes the same amount of news, like so much news. We're always in the news cycle, but it's when it's these really big global events, when they're happening, and especially with, Ukrainian Australians, Russian Australians who are here, they'll just be watching this greater saturation of this story. And it's just a nice, important reminder to take care of yourself when you are viewing it, because it is pretty tough.
Can be confronting, yeah. And it's hard to know where it'll end,
Yeah.
Especially when, 24-hour news, it can be hard.
All right, let's have a look at what else has been making news so far. And the other big story has been the flooding disaster going along the East Coast. Northern New South Wales and Southeast Queensland have been absolutely battered by an unrelenting rain bomb. That is the technical term dished out by the Bureau of Meteorology, so I'm going to use it. A rain bomb. Deadly floodwaters have been raging through so many regions. Hundreds of calls for help have been heeded by SES rescue teams. However, a lot of concern for so many people.
We must all prepare ourselves for the possibility that lives have been lost.
That was Steph Cook, the New South Wales Emergency Services Minister, talking about in particular what is happening in northeast New South Wales and the amount of rescues that we are seeing there, not only from SES volunteers, but from just your regular everyday locals who've got access to a tinny and are going in and saving vulnerable people from their roofs, from their attics, from their roof cavities. And in some cases, some people have only had about 20 centimetres left of air by the time rescuers have got to them.
Jeez, that's scary.
Which is just terrifying. Some of the footage that we're seeing, it's been really, really tough to watch, but also it's been TV that you can't look away from.
Yeah, well, on Sky News just earlier today, they had a live footage from a chopper of people getting rescued from their roofs, and that was amazing to watch it just unfold in real time.
Yeah.
I know you've been looking at a lot of the videos that are popping up on social and things like that. What are some of the images that have stuck with you?
That particular bit of vision of that rescue attempt, the helicopter, you see the harness go around the people that they're saving and then having them winched to safety. It's just heart in your mouth stuff, making sure that they don't then fall into the floodwaters, which thankfully has not seemed to have happened. And that has really stuck with me. But I think some of the other moments, I am from Brisbane, so even just any of the coverage that we've seen, any of the pictures coming out of southeast Queensland, that Brisbane River, I grew up with it. I know it so well. I know those areas. So when I see places like Rosalie underwater, when I see, the pontoons and the jetties flying down the Brisbane River towards the Howard Smith Wharves and a crane on the loose as it goes down the river, it has this extra bit of meaning to me because I know those places. And I think that it's really made me watching this coverage be, I don't know, probably a little bit more addicted to it than I usually am with news coverage, which is saying something. So those kind of images, but also really the rescues. There was a particular rescue efforts made by northeast New South Wales residents in Lismore yesterday, a particular group of Fijians who are abattoir workers, and they were helping SES volunteers save and evacuate a nursing home. So seeing them in their boats carrying really vulnerable people, elderly people, super thin and fragile, and then just getting and all soaking wet, like just sopping wet because it never stopped raining throughout any of these rescue attempts. That's something that will definitely stay with me for sure, that particular moment. But then there's also been the moments of, snakes in the floodwaters, along with green tree frogs, along with mice, along with cattle being saved. Like, there's just all these random other bits. People swimming in floodwaters. Can we just say, people, stop swimming. Stop swimming anywhere near floodwaters. I don't care if you think you can swim. You can't. You can't swim that well. So, yeah.
Let's make for good TikToks, though, so,
Excellent TikToks. But, yeah, our thoughts are with them, everyone who's been affected, because the cleanup is going to be smelly. It's going to be horrible. It's going to be labour intensive, and it's going to be expensive.
And because you were up there for the 2011 floods, right?
I was still at uni at the time, and I just remember seeing scenes of my university being underwater and people driving around on boats over the tennis courts, and you could only see the tennis court lights. That's how high the water was. And where my family is, thankfully, they haven't been affected just yet, but all the surrounding regions are a little bit lower than them. And I remember in 2011, the mud armies who would come out, the neighbours, you've got your gumboots on and you've got your broom, and people who are lucky enough to have access to a gurney. They're very, very popular. You just watch those. They're going to be really hard to come by in the coming weeks. Just going around and helping out, which I think is what we always see with natural disasters. It's so awful that they are happening, and that they seem to be happening at a lot more regular rate. The longer time and history goes on with climate change, but natural disasters always do breed that Aussie spirit. And I always say Aussie spirit in, that's classic stereotype, but, it really does live up to it here.
You'll be seeing it. The CWA will be, this is their time. They're
ready. It's their time to shine.
It's their time to shine. They're ready for this. We'll be okay. But yeah, our thoughts are with everyone up there dealing with it at the moment. Good luck, guys.
Good luck. Our thoughts are also with everyone who has been watching the events unfolding in Queensland, New South Wales, over in Ukraine, because this week in particular, J-Law, coming out of a pandemic, I feel too, we should probably put that, we should remind ourselves of that.
I haven't forgotten.
Yeah, the COVID pandemic is still here. And I think that when you have such huge weeks like this of the news cycle, it can feel really, really depressing and really, really hard. How do you cope with that? Because it is our job to always be across the news and to see these things. Yeah. How do you cope with that?
Look, I guess I probably can maintain some professional distance from it because, it's work for me. So I think I have learnt over time to switch it off. And journalists, you may not know this, but you would know this, but people may not know this who are listening, that journos have this kind of gallows humor.
Yeah.
We can make inappropriate jokes about the news as a way of coping.
Yes.
So that's one way. That's one way. And it doesn't mean that we are making light of what's going on. It's
it's a survival technique.
It's a survival technique.
Yeah.
And you'll probably notice that as we chat. We do still make jokes about these really confronting subjects, but sometimes it's the only way to get through.
Yeah.
What about you?
Oh, I try and switch off. I had to learn that though. I think it took me, I was probably 8 years into my career before I realised that I had to actually actively switch off and not look at emails, not look at the latest headlines, and just give myself time to be out of the news cycle. And I don't think I actually really thought about how the news cycle affected my mood until it was the Black Summer bushfires across Victoria and New South Wales, because at that time I was covering that non-stop daily emergency coverage, live TV, and that was really, really heavy. Doing the interviews with the emergency services live, chatting to residents where all of this is unfolding in real time when they're being told it's too late to leave, which is what happened in South Ballina for so many residents this week with the floods. So I think I didn't realise how much it affected me until that particular moment. So now it's just something I have to be conscious of. And if you are, even just looking not as much at the news as we are, I think it is important just to have a break sometimes, because it is important to be informed, but your mental health is most important.
Indeed.
Okay, but enough of that, J-Lo, because look, it's been tough. It's been a really, 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 really tough week. I think we've covered that. There's not been any, shall we say, fluffy news stories or light news stories.
We've been looking for them. We can't find them.
We have. We cannot find them. We actually cannot find them. I gave a task to our team today to be like, guys, if you see a little story that's just going to lift moods, let us know.
Crickets.
Yeah, that mission was a failure. So hopefully we will have some more fun things to talk about. But I do want to finish this on an optimistic note, J-Law, because if we're taking a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of light that we have had over the last week, COVID-19 restrictions have started easing in a lot of places across New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland. No more masks in a lot of places. Density limits are no longer too...
Might even be able to go to WA.
Oh, my God. Actually, yeah, we should have led with that. We could get into WA in a few days' time, potentially. How are you feeling about this? Are you excited does it feel like the pandemic is over, or can you be a little bit more optimistic about things to come now?
Look, I would never want to say that it's over, because that's right when...
Oh, yeah, we can't. That's also what you learn as a journalist. Yeah. Never say that. You jinx yourself.
You jinx it. So we won't say that. But I do feel like everyone is really ready to get back to normal. And, I went out in Sydney on the weekend.
Did you?
Yeah, in the CBD. And there was a bit of life about.
Stop it.
Yeah, there was a bit of...
Where'd you go?
Went to Chinatown.
Yeah.
Went to some bars.
Did you go dancing?
We didn't dance. It was sort of like a boys thing.
Oh.
So we didn't dance. But,
boys.
Boys.
The lads.
The lads. But it was good to see. There was a bit of life about, even though it was kind of rainy. That I think people were we went to a few restaurants in Chinatown, which has been really hurt by the COVID pandemic. And we got turned away.
Oh, wow.
From a couple because there was a wait. And, so that's
exciting.
A good sign.
Yeah.
It's a good sign, right?
That's really exciting. Oh, my God. Think of us 4 years ago being like, got turned away from a restaurant. We'd be like, yes.
Also, because it was the boys, we were not organised and nothing was booked. So,
I am stunned. J-Lo.
But I know, like, what about you? Are you looking forward to things now that things are starting to open up? What do you want to get back into?
Yeah. I just want to travel a bit more. I mean, be that international travel or just domestic travel right now, like probably go up and see my family in Queensland and not have to think about it so much. I still think that there is a block in my mind, which is like, oh, interstate travel, impossible. You can't do that. You can't just jump on a plane, can't go anywhere, have to sort out PCR tests and all of this. But I don't think I've quite rectified that in my head, that it is actually a lot simpler now.
You could just go.
Yeah, can just go. God, wild, fancy free.
That'll be fun. Yeah.
So, J-Law, it's that time of the podcast. Quick shout out to the platform Flash, for which we both work. For those who don't know, what is it?
Yes, Flash. It's a brand new news streaming service. It has more than 25 different news providers from across the world where you can go on and choose the news you want.
And I also think, J-Law, not to toot our own horn, however, these kind of events that we've seen this week, these really heavy global news stories, is what Flash is perfect for. Was that reflective? What have people really been, using the platform for this week?
Yeah, we've seen a really big uptick in usage of the platform ever since Russia invaded Ukraine. And it is, it's obviously a really horrible subject, but it is a really good way to keep across what's happening in live time. So we have really the best news services for these type of events. CNN had really, really impressive coverage 24/7 of every little moment. They've got reporters in all of the main cities in Ukraine. Anderson Cooper is there in Lviv at the moment. They have reporters in every corner. Also the BBC, hugely well funded and like just among the best in the world at this kind of coverage. Al Jazeera also super impressive coverage. So what Flash allows you to do is jump between these different providers, and this is what I've been doing. And sort of, I'll watch a little bit of CNN, then flip over to Al Jazeera to see how they're reporting it, see what the BBC has.
Well, that's what we did last Thursday when war broke out I think it was Thursday afternoon, and we were all madly trying to figure out what was going on, and we just put the platform on, Flash, that we work for, and we were jumping between BBC, seeing what they're doing, CNN, Al Jazeera, and it's just so simple. And then you get to be up to date with like the best coverage that you can get.
That's right. And, some people will feel like they like one channel more than the other, and, the perspectives provided on one channel they might like more than another. And that's the beauty of it. You can kind of find the news that fits with what you want. Whether you want to go really in depth or you want to sort of get things quick and easy, we've got you covered.
And so what kind of things can we be looking at this week? I would like to say recommendation for anyone who may not have seen it. It should be up on Flash. There is a moment when it's the CNN correspondent Matthew Chance, and he is talking to Don Lemon, I believe, back in the States. And it's the moment where you just hear the shelling and you hear those air raid sirens while he is going live, and you see him put his flak jacket on, you see him struggling to put his helmet on because it's such a serious situation, but you can really see how fraught it is in real time.
And another thing this week, I know that you did a bit of a deep dive into the misinformation that's coming out as the Ukraine crisis unfolds. What did you find out?
Yeah, that good old fake news. It's literally a phrase that I think makes every journalist just cringe a little bit. But in this situation, it's been really interesting to take a closer look at it, because this misinformation war, there's one happening at the moment in conjunction with all of the conflict that we are seeing in Ukraine. And really that's about the rise of TikTok and Instagram as news services and whether or not they are legitimate news services. So there's so many verified news organisations that have social media accounts, and their corros can be seen, on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter, walking through Kyiv, and you can see the destruction, you can see them commentating live events. However, there is also this spread of misinformation in that lots of people on TikTok in particular will be trying to catastrophize events even further so that they can get more likes, more followers, go viral, and then have that equal a money cash payout for them. Because if you have more likes, if you have more followers, then you get more money, essentially.
Right. And so what's an example of like one of the doctored videos you found?
Yeah, well, there was a time, I think it was posted a couple of hours after the initial reports of shelling in Ukraine last Thursday. There was a video that went up on TikTok, and it seemed to show Russian troopers parachuting into Ukraine. And it was a man who was in a parachute, in a military uniform, vlogging the experience, and it just sent social media into an absolute tailspin, being like, this is happening real time right now. Russia is heading into Ukraine. 20 million views it got in not too long a time. Turns out that video was actually initially posted on Instagram by that same TikTok user 6 or 7 years ago, and it was a training drill, a Russian training drill for paratroopers back in 2015.
And there you go.
So it's those sorts of things which, if your source is not a verified news organisation, and even then, not the whole time when it's breaking news, you can't rely on that to be right 1,000% of the time. So it is really tough. But just be mindful when you are looking at these things that it may not be exactly as it appears, because there is monetary gain that can be made from people taking advantage of horrible situations.
Well, that was a really good story of yours. Another thing you can watch on Flash.
Thank you. Yeah, watch it, guys. Watch it. I talk about so many other examples as well, but I just find that it's such an interesting way of looking at this current conflict, because we're just going to see more of it as cyber warfare, really amps up.
Yep. This is the age we're in.
All right. That was a heavy show, J-Lo.
It was heavy. We'll try and lighten things up next week. No promises.
No promises. We can't promise anything in the news cycle these days, but thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back next week. We'll chat then. Remember, Flash, give it a try.
Check it out.
Check it out. Keep listening to us at Flash Drive. It's all about the news you need, when you want, and how you want. See you next week.
See you later.
Remember, if you enjoy the news and this podcast, who wouldn't, and you want to learn more about Flash, you can always sign up at flashnews.com.au. Flash lets you stream more than 25 news channels in the one place, and you actually get a free 14-day trial for new customers. So make sure you do that. Start streaming your news today.